As the BBC releases the second part of its documentary on Prime Minister Modi, the storm around it refuses to die down. The government has dismissed the documentary as malicious propaganda. I'm Barkha, Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, our special continued coverage of the debate around this documentary and the government response to it. Now, remember, the centre has invoked emergency powers under the IT rules to stop the documentary from airing in India or being available on social media platforms. The opposition has challenged this, but the centre argues that this is malicious propaganda reflective of what the government has called a colonial mindset. The ripple effect continues to be felt across the political spectrum, and India has taken a very, very tough position on this documentary that, in two parts, actually harks back to the 2002 riots in Gujarat. There have been many varied opinions, and one such opinion has come from senior BJP leader, member of the party's national executive, Swapan Dasgupta, who, in fact, is somebody who has been interviewed in this documentary. But Mr. Dasgupta has described the documentary as a hatchet job. He has, in interviews, suggested that he was not given to believe that the focus of the first part of the documentary would be so conclusively on 2002. In fact, it was suggested to him that the documentary would be a larger profile of India and the Prime Minister. To talk about this documentary, the politics around it, and India's response to it, let's go across now to senior BJP leader, member of the party's national executive, who's also been a member of the Rajya Sabha for the BJP, and of course has been a veteran journalist and editor of our Times, Swapan Dasgupta. Swapan, it's very good to see you. Let me start by asking you, you were actually interviewed for this documentary. People who watched the documentary did see your interview in the film. On what assumptions did you, for instance, agree to participate in this documentary that the government has now dismissed as propaganda and colonialist?
Well, I was informed that, on the occasion of 75 years of Indian independence, and they were going to do a film documentary on Narendra Modi, his politics, etc. And I was told that it would also predictably refer to some aspects, and that was an afterthought and something added on to the 2002 riots, which I thought was okay, understandable. So I agreed to participate in it. Well, I think by the time when the crew came down to Calcutta, where I was, and the questions started, it became quite apparent, what the larger agenda was, and that it was going to be an entirely negative one. And the questions flowed accordingly. And I stand by my earlier observation that this was a hatchet job, and they had a certain conclusion, predetermined conclusion, and they set out to get voices and incidents to fit with the narrative.
So, when did you discover this? When you watched it like everybody else?
No,
Initially, the
I
film
think
was
I
not.
got a I got a fair sense of it even when the questions were there. But once you agreed to do an interview, you did it. So I said my piece, whatever had to be done. I understand. I saw that they'd incorporated some of it, not all of it, but that's also editorially understandable that you can't, because you know there was a larger narrative which says India has really gone to the dogs under Narendra Modi, and it all began with in 2002 with this sort of genocidal attack on Muslims, and that Muslims have really been targeted. And it's a sort of, as far as I can see, and I saw a bit of the second part as well. It's a it's a sort of documentary which is the base that Muslims have really got it badly, have really been affected badly, and that by Modi's advent, and that the entire Indian state is now biased, and there's a sort of institutionalized discrimination against Muslims. That's the larger narrative which they have in mind. Of course, I don't agree with that, but that's their point of view.
Yeah, so that's the important question. Then there are two parts to this debate. One, the documentary itself, what we may think of it, how we may think of the BBC's sort of gaze on India, and the other is the government's response. So let me come to the government's response first. Let's assume for a moment that this is a propaganda film, which is how the foreign ministry has described it. It is reflective of a colonial mindset. Questions may still be asked as to why the government would feel it necessary to invoke emergency powers under the IT rules of 2021 to stop it from broadcasting. Why do you think the government has responded as it has?
Well, Barkha, the whole point about it is that the real objections to this documentary is not so much the arguments. Those are arguments which were made during the 2014 elections, earlier in the Gujarat Assembly elections, and even continue to be made now. There's nothing unique about that. But what I think is slightly disturbing is that the casual and slightly dismissive and condescending way in which very important Supreme Court judgments, the role of the judiciary in adjudicating this whole episode around 2002 has been casually, you know, di- it's been factored in but sort of dismissed as something which was bound to happen, because in India the implied thing is that in India judiciary is not really free and they were just reflecting a political opinion. Now, in my view, that really undermines a very important institution of India. It undermines a very important pillar of Indian democracy. And the government could have reacted in two ways. They could have protested about it, had there been a sort of bilateral thing. But this is not a government thing. This is not a government to government issue.
Mhm.
And remember, the BBC's, this was not even made directly by the BBC. As far as I understand, the BBC bureau in Delhi wasn't even aware that such a thing was being made. It was subcontracted, outsourced to an independent producer who made it for the BBC. Now, under the circumstances, what do? You protest. But I think the government, this was a protest. It was a strong protest. How do you do it? You just sort of invoke a particular section. So I think it was more symbolic rather than the reality that actually it won't be seen, because in today's day and age, in technology, it's very
Yeah.
difficult.
I mean, I was
Uh,
just going to say that it's all being circulated on WhatsApp anyway.
yeah,
So
yeah, it's going to be circulated, and then there are these people who are putting up "Vive la Revolution" in Calcutta and sort of showing
I thought
that. And
I thought you were going to say JNU, where actually you had
yeah,
groups
it's been happening
clashing
in
over.
Calcutta as well. I'm sort of slightly puzzled to see that the BBC documentary is the sort of intellectual heir of Che Guevara, but so be it. It's bravado. People earlier used to read Lady Chatterley's Lover. Now they're going to see this.
Okay, more seriously, there are issues about censorship that have been raised even by those who are not fans of the British or the Western gaze. Shashi Tharoor, your friend, college mate, for one, saying to me that, look, I get why people are irritated. This is 21 years later. There is that annoyance at a stereotyping. There is that sense that, you've woken up just now. But he called the government response childish. He said that it presents India as fragile and insecure. It would have been much better to ignore it, let people make up their own mind, like, dislike. Maybe they wouldn't have even watched it in the numbers that they might now with all the fuss that's been created over it. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, Shashi has a point. I mean, the point is that BBC there's been whenever you ban something or whenever you drag something into a controversy, you give that thing a far greater publicity than is also sometimes warranted. And to that extent, this has really happened here. I mean, in various ways, I'm reminded when I saw this film, I was reminded of Gandhi's comments on Catherine Mayo's Mother India, and where he said that if you set out to explore what's inside a drain, you're bound to get very, very predictable responses or findings. And here, so this was an attempt to actually show the underside, and a very one-sided underside of India's, what has happened in India, and it was by no means a fair and a balanced. I don't think they even attempted to be balanced or fair about it. It was a one-sided tirade about
But
Narendra.
but uh, but but even polemics have a space to exist, right?
Oh, of course,
Polemicists,
of course.
political ideologies.
I'm not questioning. I have a very thick skin. So I mean, what Shashi said, people should.
Join the gang. Join the gang.
Yeah, so I've got a very thick skin about this, and having been in journalism, you sometimes take the good with the bad. So perhaps but an important thing is that a protest had to be made, some sort of a show of intense displeasure at the undermining of certain Indian institutions had to be made. Now, what was the most appropriate way of making it? Now, we are coming down to the question of that. Could it have been, someone writes a letter to the BBC, or tells them, pack up your bags, you people in the BBC in Delhi, and, go away? I don't think that's a fair thing. So I think someone decided that the only realistic way to do it is by a very symbolic thing of saying, okay, this is banned and this is outlawed. Was it the most appropriate way? I don't know, but
Are you
anyway.
comfortable? Are you comfortable? You were a journalist before you were a politician. Of course, that said, no party in India has a great record on free speech. There have been bans on the watch of every party, and we know this. From Salman Rushdie to Andhi to now this documentary. Are you comfortable with the ban? I don't disagree. You're right to call the documentary biased or even malicious. But are you comfortable with the ban?
Look, nobody is comfortable with any ban.
Yeah.
Let's be fair about it. It's undesirable. And, normally if you say a ban is warranted, you normally reserve it for child pornography or something like that. So and this is a sort of a political tirade against the Modi government, whether should you ban it. It's like saying, if someone was to put this in prose and circulate a book along with it, would you ban it? And the point is probably not. So yes, it's not the happiest of circumstances in which a ban, but I can understand why people have decided to register their displeasure in this way. Maybe if some other way could be found out, I would be much happier. But as far as the colonial part is concerned, and I think there's a lot of the discussion on this. I mean, my thing is that there is a tradition in the United Kingdom as well as in the United States, and you're probably familiar with it, which believes that everyone else's business is our business, and that's a sort of a mindset which works. And in India, we do quite the opposite. We don't necessarily cover world affairs as we probably should do.
Yeah.
If we are boxing above their weight, we are boxing. Sometimes we tend to undermine our own position. So I can understand where their sort of over-intrusive approach comes from, and particularly when a British citizen is involved, as it happened in the case. And there were a Muslim family in Yorkshire which was involved, so they felt it. We must be the final adjudicator of what took place in 2002 and resurrect an issue which, if I was to go by your interview with Shashi, had really been forgotten, because Shashi couldn't even get the year right.
Yes, he said 2001 by mistake. Yes,
how distant it is from immediate memory. And but it's more in nature of we are the ultimate judge of whatever happens in the world, and and as far as Modi is concerned, Modi is always the baddie. Modi has been the bad guy in a particular mindset, in a particular narrative. Just like the other person who I admire more in the European Union, Viktor Orban, is. So these are people who are seen to be the baddies in the sort of liberal worldview is concerned. Nothing they can do is ever right, and Modi is into that thing. The more he's wrong, the more support I guess he musters in the people like me who love to hate the liberals.
Okay, that the love to hate the liberals is of course a subject for a much deeper conversation. But here's my question to you. One of the things cited in the documentary as as new information is the citing of a British High Commission report that Jack Straw, the former British Foreign Secretary, has endorsed. And when I'm hearing you talk about the West looking in, but India never looking out of the West. For example, it would be surprising if an Indian filmmaker went and made a film on abortion rights in the US or shooting. And I understand that asymmetry of power, but how do you respond to sort of the Jack Straw citing in this documentary?
Well, I knew about this report at the time it was written in as far back as 2002, when I think it was. And from what I understand is that a third secretary of the British High Commission was dispatched to Ahmedabad, where she met the usual suspects, exactly who people meet. The English-speaking critics of Modi, who thinks of the BJP as a sort of parvenu organization, socially unfit, etc., aesthetically unpleasing. So they forged a report based on by an accumulation of all the horror stories, and that was that. And it was predictably never published, and it was Jack Straw, who was foreign secretary, read it, and that's where it is. I don't think we should necessarily think of it as such a definitive report. And when the archives are open, we'll see it and we'll find. I mean, I'm almost certain that when the archives are finally opened after 30 years, you'll get the report will have the usual. It will probably be a collation of all the press reports
Yeah.
critical of Modi at that time.
And I hear you, but I will still ask you this: that if this documentary had been made in India by an Indian and not by the BBC, citing an outside sort of power, as it were, in this case, the British High Commission, would the response have been different? Let's come back to the colonialism dimension of this debate. Is
No,
it
no, no. It could have
colonialism?
been different. I think the importance is that the documentary makers attached a great deal of importance to this so-called third secretary's report. We wouldn't certainly have attached. I don't think anyone took that into account. I'm sure the EU had its own
Yeah.
findings. The Americans, because they find out to try and find out everything. They must have had their own report, etc. Whatever steps they took, and they factored in. So, what's the colonial mindset? It's based on a degree of condescension, as far as so much the report is concerned, but as far as the filmmakers are concerned, which is based on the belief that we are going to be the ultimate judge. So it's based on a degree of condescension. We know what's best for your country. We are going to assess your country based on our standards, which are universal standards, and they are the only standards which work. So if that is that sort of degree of trusteeship is what they define the empire in a lot of ways, and to that extent it's colonial. But I would say colonial, racism, condescension, all of them sort of merge together. Which one I would prioritize is a matter of you to do. I certainly don't like the use of the word colonial, because I think it's archaic, and the Brits themselves are got all squeamish about
Yeah.
colonialism. So
What's the word you'd use? What is the word you'd use if not colonial?
well, I think it's based on a degree of condescension. It's very patronizing. It's a belief that our democracy is perfect, our values are perfect, and you somehow are inferior in things, and you take a lot of shit, and your standards need to be improved.
Finally, the free speech debate in India is marred by politics. We've had, ironically, the son of Congressman A.K. Antony having to, or not having to, choosing to resign after he was asked to take down his tweets on this documentary. Anil Antony, a young leader, actually had problems with this documentary. Now, there could be other politics at play here. But how do you see the fact that we've never really been able to remove politics from our conversations around free speech? Kolkata, where you are, just had a professor coming out of jail after a Mamata Banerjee diktat. But we have also seen other instances of it on the watch of every single party, including the BJP.
Yeah, I do agree with you that to a very large extent we do have very thin skins, all of us, and the belief that sab chalta hai, which is what we do in normal life. Sometimes it doesn't extend to the idea of speech, but in reality it does. But sometimes it doesn't. I mean, look at our political speeches during election time. People say all sorts of things. They're defamatory, they are slanderous, they're everything. They're imaginative, they're fiction, they're all sorts of things. But we take that, it's part of the game. But there are moments when we sort of tend to react, overreact, etc. Especially when it comes to dealing with something which happens outside the shores of India. I think we tend to. And my own feeling is that we should realize that. We are going to get a lot of very, very hypercritical comments about India the more and more we assert ourselves in the world. Now, how we deal with this is something which is in need of a very intelligent conversation, which involves the Ministry of External Affairs, which involves our intelligence agencies, which sometimes give rather colored reports about who's doing what, and the political class as well. And maybe this would be a good occasion after the dust is settled. We take into account how in the in the coming 25 years we're going to deal with we're going to deal with the outside world, and how we're going to deal with criticisms which sometimes are going to be extremely unfair.
But
And
shouldn't there be a
very,
better
very
way?
easy to
Shouldn't there be a better way? Because India would have looked, in my humble opinion, so much better if India had just ignored this documentary.
Well, Barkha, you and I probably have had a certain. We assume we are going about this issue from a very, very different point of view, from a very different. Everyone else that does not think it. I think there is a great deal of anger which is there, which you and I might not feel, because we said, "Oh, chalta hai, bhai, what the hell?" But there are people who feel that, how dare they, and things like that. So I don't know. I don't think that there's ever going to be a perfect solution to this. Someone's going to overreact. Someone is going to be rather blasé about this whole thing. Who knows? I mean, I believe the important thing is, what are the larger lessons in terms of policy, in terms of approaches, which we can get, which we imbibe from this very unfortunate experience which has happened, this unfortunate controversy which has taken place.
So let me give you the last word. If there's one thing you think this documentary should make us think about, what is that?
Well, it's about time we also have a look at other parts of the world. We must have a more internationalist orientation, and we must not always be the passive victims of other people intruding into India. We too should, if there's something which happens in Ireland, I think we should send parliamentary delegations there. If next time there's a riot in some southern town in the United States, maybe we should have our own human rights bodies which actually we have our own Amnesty Internationals and Human Rights Watch which can do it. Maybe it's just a suggestion. Maybe it'll just help Indians feel, look, we too are involved in the world. It's not only that we are the passive victims of other people's condescension. We too are now a player in this world. Once that seeps in, I think a greater degree of self-confidence will happen in India.
Thank you, Swapan. I actually agree with that last point very much. I think there's a lot of annoyance in being shaped by a singular, broad stroke, stereotypical narrative. And why shouldn't we have the right to also comment on other parts of the world? Thank you very much.
We have the right. We never exercise it.
We just don't do it. We just don't do it. We just don't do it. Yes. So I think that's well said. While, of course, the debate continues over whether this was the best response, I think on the last point, I do completely agree with you. Thank you very much, Swapan, for talking to us. Take care and see you soon.
Thank you, Barkha.
Thank you. Bye-bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.